In all the VOD reviews I've done in Halo Infinite, I've commonly seen people get picked off when they're completely isolated, they're consistently dying and not getting the value that they need to carry games, and nearly all of it is not because of your mechanical skill, but your positioning instead. Now we're gonna break down some key fundamentals of positioning so that you can position better, do more damage, get more kills, and die less. Sound pretty fucking good? Well, it is, so we're gonna break it down. But if you wanna know how pro players position, you gotta go to the GameLeap website because we have breakdowns of pros showcasing how they position and how they're so effective at dominating games. So do yourself a favor and go check it out right now down below. Now, the first and most important fundamental concept you have to learn is natural cover. Centering around cover is incredibly important. Here's the idea. If you're ever under fire from any position that you and your team haven't cleared or don't control, you need to be able to get behind cover within a second or slightly more at most. The way that I best explain this is that there's a tether between you and natural cover, and if you break that tether and you have no cover around you and it's gonna take you 2 seconds or more before you get to cover, if 2 enemies pop out of nowhere and start shooting at you, you're gonna die even if you start beelining instantly towards cover. Now, how far you can play off of natural cover is also going to depend slightly on what type of items you have. Like if you have something like a thruster, you can play a little bit off natural cover more, play something called an off angle rather than playing the natural normal angles that are near these covered sources. However, you still can't go too far. You still can't just neglect the fundamentals, and just keep in mind that if you're near cover, if you take shots from anywhere, you can dip behind that cover. Now enemies are gonna either have to push you, they're gonna have to grenade you out, or whatever the case may be, but that gives you time, that allows you to reset the fight, potentially heal up, and then be ready for them to approach you rather than them getting to shoot at you first and you don't have any recourse at all. Now, I do say natural cover, and a question I get often is, okay, so if there is natural cover, is there any other types of cover? Well, yes, technically there is artificial cover as well, and there's only one big instance right now in Halo Infinite, and that's the drop shield. This is an artificial cover, something that you can actually create instantly. You can shoot through it, they cannot unless they break it. That's something that you can create, but it's not guaranteed. So hypothetically, you can position a lot further away from natural cover, be somewhere more out in the open, if you have that drop shield on standby, because it can create a sort of artificial cover temporarily that can allow you to turn a fight that even if the enemy shoots at you in open space, you can pop up a sort of cover and get the advantage on them, or use it as a catalyst to allow you to escape. Now, not all cover is created equal, especially in Halo Infinite when grenades play a really vital role. You gotta understand that the more enclosed the space is, sure, you are more protected, but you are also more susceptible to getting grenade spammed. So I think a happy medium is incredibly important here. And also, if you are playing in a place that is easy to grenade, it is important to not hold that position for too long. Any sort of presence you present in any position for too long is going to meet a lot of grenade spam as a response. So if you keep that in mind, you can be effective from a position, but then you gotta rotate on after a little while. Now, the next general rule, and this is so important, the high ground is absolute god tier. It's so freaking important to constantly have presence on the high ground. And I'm gonna tell you many reasons for it. The first one is you get to see enemies a lot easier than they can see you. Because of the way that the angle is split, the top half of your body is gonna be peeking out of that high ground, while if an enemy is below you, you can see their entire body, and it's really easy for you to shoot at them. Another very important thing you need to understand about high ground is if you back off away from the high ground, all of a sudden, you're not peeking the enemy. So what does that make the floor of the high ground you're standing on? That is right. It is natural freaking cover. Basically, if you back up from the high ground, you are no longer peeking someone from the low ground, where if they don't have some other sort of obstruction, they can't de-peek you just from moving backwards. So they don't have cover basically attached to them automatically. This is gonna give you any huge advantage from the high ground challenging someone directly underneath you. And here's the last big thing about the high ground is the transitionary period between going to the high ground and low ground is not only a way to get out if someone chases you, it's a way to quickly run away and quickly actually leave the position that you're in a moment's notice, but you can jump off the high ground and chase an enemy if they're low. Like if you fight someone, you get them very weak, you can jump off, chase them, and kill them very easily. But if you're on the high ground and they're on the low ground and they break your shields, it's much harder for them to transition from the low ground to the high ground. So that gives you a natural form of advantage there, but it is important to understand ways in which they could and think about the items that they could have that could potentially chase you. It's not a guarantee, but it is extra insulation. And it's one of the many reasons why if you're holding a powered position, it needs to be from the high ground. Now, another thing that can directly affect positioning, and this is incredibly important, your teammate's location. Not only for spawning, because remember, enemies are going to spawn away from the largest grouping of allies. So if you're somewhere isolated and like the entire enemy team is dead, you're isolated, your team is one place, your position is what I would call a red zone or a danger zone, where it's incredibly likely that enemies are going to spawn somewhere around you. And if you are, with your team, it doesn't matter if you don't know where the enemies are. Your positioning is far safer, not only because you have teammates to back you up if you get in a firefight, but you also are less likely to have the enemies spawn near you if you're near your allies and the enemies are respawning. Now, I did mention the red danger zone, and this is the best way that I have actually coached and explained positioning and how to get better at positioning, and it's been the most effective teaching strategy so far, so it's the one that I'm going to try to properly explain in this video. So basically, if your teammates are occupying a space and you have cleared it or you have cleared it yourself, that would be a green zone where it's okay to sprint through this zone. It's okay to run around this zone. You still got to keep in mind that some of this zone is going to be able to peek some more dangerous zones, so you have to be careful in that aspect. But as far as an enemy being in this zone, it's incredibly unlikely, and there's probably no one there. That's what I would call a green zone, and you have to think about that mentally. What is a green zone? A yellow zone would be a zone or area on the map where it's split. Like, you don't know for sure if there's enemies here. Maybe you have one ally that's in that area and they're not under fire, so you think, hey, maybe it's unlikely, but there could still be, and you're not 100% sure. So these are areas that you want to turn into green zones. These are areas that you're not running around, you're clearing angles, clearing corners, looking around with your gun out, ready to fight, ready to fire, and you're expecting enemies to be around any corner, or you're trying to clear this area to turn it into a green zone. So that's the yellow zone, and this is what the majority of zones are going to be on around the map until you clear them, until your team clears them. And the last zone that we're going to talk about is the red zone, and that's zones where it's highly likely that there's enemies there. It's not confirmation, but it's very, very likely. And the way that you play these zones is much safer because you also assume that there's going to be multiple enemies there. These are not zones that you just want to run into like a psychopath and, clear all of these zones with your rifle, right? You can't just run in and try to clear, because in order to get to a red zone, you have to cross a yellow. So you have to cross an area that you have not cleared and you do not know if enemies are in, straight into an area where you highly suspect enemies to be in, and that puts you in a very positionally bad area. Typically, if you can keep all your fights in that yellow zone, where the yellow zone allows you to easily dip from that yellow caution zone into the green zone that you cleared, that you know that there's no one there, that you know that there's no enemies there, and it's a safe area, that is the best way to position. Because if you go balls deep into the red zone, then in order to get away, you have to run into that no man's land yellow zone, and then you have to go all the way to a green zone, and that's a lot of time, a lot of transitions, and by then you're probably gonna be dead. Now keep in mind, the color or the danger level of an area is gonna change rapidly, and it's typically gonna change with time. So let's say you're in a zone with your team, right? And y'all leave that zone. After you leave it, after about 10 seconds go by, or maybe after an enemy dies and there's a potential that they could spawn in a green zone, all of a sudden that zone changes. You do not know that it's green anymore, so you cannot assume that it's a safe area. You can only assume a place is safe if you recently cleared it or you still have active control or presence there. And that is ultimately what positioning is all about. Keeping track of what is safe, keeping track of the areas that are safe, making sure to position yourself in places where you can effectively deal damage, see enemies, give yourself an out. Make sure to be careful about peeking angles where enemies are likely to be, and be very specific with fighting in areas that are dangerous, or make sure that you have an area that is safe to retreat to. I know it's a lot that I'm talking about here, but in Halo Infinite, positioning is one of the most important concepts to nail down, and this is the best way that I have in order to help you perfectly understand how to position better, how to make better rotation and exit decisions, and ultimately get more value. Now, the last thing about positioning that I wanted to talk about, and this is incredibly important, what weapons you or your team versus what weapons the enemies have can directly change how good a position is. So a great example of this is, let's say enemies are holding a really tight area, a really close corridor, maybe they have the oddball or whatever, but they have a goddamn energy sword and they have a mangler. Their position is already strong, but because they have weapons that are effectively strong in that area, their position becomes even stronger. And the same thing actually works in situations where, let's say you're holding out in the open or you're challenging in the open. If the enemy team has control of a sniper rifle, challenging in the open becomes a lot weaker positionally. If you had BRs versus the enemy, you could be on the high ground challenging in open space and it would be fine. Let's talk about Livewire, right? If you're fighting enemies that are near B side from bridge with them having BRs, you having BRs, that's actually fine. You positionally have a slight better position. You can nade them out, you can see them, you have the high ground, you have good exits. But if the enemy have control of the sniper rifle, all of a sudden it could be a huge liability for y'all to play there, because if y'all peek and get killed by a sniper, that sniper has open and easy line of sights to you, and they can take shots without pressure on them because you're not right on top of them to push them and punish them for missing. So that is something that's incredibly important to understand, how weapons themselves can change how a position is strong or weak. But I really hope that this kind of gave you a nice summary about positioning, what you should be thinking about to position better. And of course, I can do more breakdowns on this concept if you really want to, you know, learn this concept even better and learn it even more, because I'm telling you, it's the most important thing, and good positioning versus bad positioning is what separates, you know, decent players or okay players from god tier players. So definitely, you know, ingrain these concepts into your mind, and please ask me any questions you have. And if you want more, go to the GameLeap website where we have more positioning breakdowns. We have VOD reviews of pro players showcasing their positioning, and we also do breakdowns of players that have bad positioning and tell you what they can do to better it. But do yourself a favor and go check it out right now down below.